School. Our Sunday school time that we spend together, our Christian education time we spend together. We have worship at 10:30 a.m., but this is the time that we go through our Sunday school book and we learn and see what God has to say. The lesson is lesson number 8, April the 19th, 2020. And our lesson today that our title of our lesson is entitled Injustice will be punished. Injustice will be punished. Our devotional reading is Luke 19:11 through 26. Our lesson text today is Esther chapter number 7, verse 1 through 10. And our key verse is verse number 10. And the key verse says this: So they hung Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Malachi. And then was the king wrath purified. Haman on the gallows that he prepared for him. He now hangs himself. Haman hangs himself because injustice will be punished. And that is the lesson today. I hope that you will read the lesson text, because it is the lesson text that provides us an insight in which Haman would, you got to be careful that when you try to play a game with anyone, that you yourself will fall into that particular game. Haman was one who God will raise up for a day like this. And about 5 years, Haman was promoted to a high-ranking position in the king's court. When he entered the palace, he expected everyone he considered beneath him to bow before him, to bow and to give him homage. But Malachi did not do that. He did not do that. Though he kept quiet about his religion, he still did not bow down to anyone or anything except his God. When the gatekeeper questioned him, and Haman, he told them that it was against his Jewish faith, and the other gatekeeper reported the information to Haman and possibly acted in favor of him to explain why he did not bow to Haman. Instead of giving Malachi a break, he set in motion a plan not only to get rid of him, but all the Jews in the entire empire. That's the whole gist of this story that we're studying today, that injustice, and we do have a lot of injustice, and we're going to go through this lesson. I'm going to do a little deviation from the lesson, but it still will be relevant. Those that have their book, there is the 3 levels of the petition, then the sentence, and then the conclusion of how the author is saying injustice will be punished. If you were up last night at 10 o'clock, there was a wonderful story on CNN as relates to the disparities and the inequities that is happening among black and brown people as related to the coronavirus, COVID-19. And I think that was kind of a launching pad for me to talk about this text, this subject matter of injustice will be punished. The whole gist of the interview with Don Ledham and Van and other participants. The whole gist of the interview was showing how the coronavirus have taken out many of African Americans simply because of a systemic problem of poverty and economic disparity. Poverty, which is economic disparity, and education, a level of injustice that many of African Americans they can't afford to eat correctly because of the poverty stricken. So it's Latinos, and they have multiple jobs. My wife and I, we had an interesting conversation today about how and why is so many nursing homes being affected, particularly if everybody's within the confines of the facility. And I didn't think of this. Her cousin and her had this conversation, and we just picked it up where they left off. Do you not know that many of the workers, particularly the low-grade workers that works in nursing homes, the nurses' aide, many of them have multiple jobs in the healthcare or caring industry and so forth. So therefore, if they go from one place to another place in order to make ends meet, and as they go from one job to the next job, they expose themselves to the coronavirus, and then they bring it into an environment that's supposed to be safe. And that's why the numbers are soaring among nursing homes, because these people are most vulnerable. So therefore, if one person is affected or a systematic comes into, because they don't know that they have been infected, because they don't have no kind of symptoms or manifestation of symptoms, and they go in and start touching people. Or I am a believer that I think it's more than just touching. I think it's some of it's airborne, yes, through our mouth, that as we have the droplets, I think that they can travel. I don't know how far they can, but this is a real serious problem of the injustice that people in nursing homes, that black and brown people are experiencing, because we don't have the ability to have the isolation, to have the gear. Economically, we just don't have it, and that is a great disparity that we have experienced and continue to experience, and it is cultural. Now, how is that reverent? Thank you. How is that related to our lesson? Let's do it that way. How is that related? Is it related to our lesson in this regard, in that we have the story of Ezra being raised up because Haman was trying to get rid of all the Jews, and we have heard people preach about this over and over again, and the lesson is about this, that Esther did not have the right to enter into the king's quarters, and only time she can go if she was summoned by the king. It was a cultural being disrespect if you would show up without having an invitation. But because of the injustice, Esther took a chance, and she said these words. And my aunt used to preach this sermon all the time for Women's Day, or just preach it. And the words she preached was, "If I perish, let me perish. I'm going to see the king." That's the whole gist of this. The whole gist of this is that Haman is trying to undermine, is trying his best to undermine and trying to hinder the security of Jews, and they did nothing because they had a belief in God and they trust God. God was their sovereignty. It was not the king, and now he pushed this, and listen what it says in verse number 7. And the king arose from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request of his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Verse number 6 is very powerful, that Edwers said, "Thou adversary and enemy is thou wicked Haman." And Haman was afraid because of the king and the queen. In other words, he said, listen, your problem is that you have someone undermining you. I want just to read a little of this, a few verses, not much of this, because you can read it from Esther chapter number 7. I just want to read the first, perhaps the first 3 verses. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of the wine, "What is thou petition, Esther? And it shall be granted of thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to half of the kingdom." Imagine the kind of influence that Esther had. She got a whiff of the demise of the Jews, and she said, I have to inform the king. But it's interesting to see that Esther held herself in such a high regard that the king says, "What is your petition?" I mean, she probably laid it out when she decided to go to the banquet where she was not given a formal invitation, or she was not summoned. Being a woman, she probably laid it out. I mean, she probably put the best outfit that she could find. I mean, she just laid it out, and when the king saw her, he probably was just overwhelmed, emotionally excited about seeing this gorgeous, beautiful, I call it black woman, or Asiatic black woman. And he said, whatever you want. I mean, whatever you. He probably had a little wine in him, and he was feeling kind of merry, and said, "Whatever you want." And verse 3 said, and Esther the king answered and said, "If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given at my petition, and my people at my request." Now it's interesting. He said, "For we are sold, and I and my people to be destroyed, to be slain, and to be punished. But if we have been sold by bondsmen and bondwomen, bondsmen and bondwomen, I have held my tongue, although the enemy could not cover the king of danger." So in other words, he said, "Listen, king, we've been sold, and you don't even know it. There are people that have manipulated you." That's why you got to be so careful in life that people don't manipulate you, because some people, I've been victims of, you don't give you all the information for you to make the correct decisions. And that's a fact. That's life. Some people say, "Well, I made this decision based upon the information that I have." You got to be careful who's around you, because there are some people that are around you not for you, or some people that are around you that don't really want you to advance or make a decision that would have irreparable damage. And that's what she was saying. The decisions that have been made are decisions of the manipulation that has been done to you will cause irreparable damage to me. I mean, you're attracted to me, you love me, but not only just me, but my people. Because once the king have made an edict and have given a decree, it could not be reversed. It was what it was, and it could not be diverse. So that reverse. So therefore, Esther said, and I like what the author said. I'm just abstracting from this story because it's a great story. Esther, dressed in her royal garment, and went to the king's palace. And the king saw her and motioned with his royal supplica for her to come. And he asked, "What do you want?" And she invited him and Hyman to a banquet that night, and he accepted. And there she laid out to him. Women always have a plan. Where men don't have a plan, women always have a plan. Listen to this. God prepares his servants for things before that they happen. We don't always know what God is doing, and that is a fact. But looking back, we can see the hand of God at work. Esther sent word to what's his name, sister? You know the lesson? Malachi, thank you. I can't mind pronouncing it, Malachi, to have all the Jews to be killed. But God always have a plan, and that's the key to this. God always have a plan. He's never without a plan. So God always have a plan. The petition is Esther 7:1-6. That king is quite taken with Esther beauty, and that's the fact. She quite taken by her beauty. While they are eating, the king asked, "What is your petition?" And listen what he says. And he said to her, "I will grant you up to half of the kingdom." Now, he was setting this thing up for later on. I'm talking about later on. But she was setting it up to punish injustice, and that's what we have to do. I'm so glad that we are benefiting for the people who have stood up and spoke. It was many of the civil rights pioneers who made tremendous contribution for the limited amount of access and freedom that we do have. We've come a long ways, but we still have a long ways to go. Rosa Parks, she had to sit down that we might stand. She determined, I'm human. I don't need to be human. I don't need to be dehumanized. I don't need to be humiliated. And she decided to sit where she wanted to, and she said that we could stand. And we've been standing. The problem that we do have now, even though some of the injustices have been punished through a great deal of legislation that have happened, there are a lot of people that want to reverse, want to roll back what the gains that we've had, and they've done it in a very systematic way. Sometimes even within our own community, our black and brown community, what the broader community have succeeded in doing is now dividing us through classism and sexism, the classism. We do have more black people of color, more people of color that's living better than they ever lived prior to the civil rights movement. We all was in the same boat. We was pedaling together. But because after the civil rights movements and affirmative actions, laws that was placed, we were systematically placed in classes. And so now, and there was a sense of that early on with the sororities and fraternities. There was light skin, the dark skin, and all that was manipulative to cause us to think that we better than each other. the haves and the have-nots, and in some instance it have created this tension among us that while we should be pulling together to eradicate injustice, a lot of folks have said, well, that's not my problem, that's their problem. But it is your problem. It is your problem when our black men, thank God that it has, to a certain degree, society. We may have seen the apex of it, but they were shooting down black men at an alarming rate. They were not asking no questions. I mean, in South Carolina, a black brother was shot he was running away, and a white officer thought nobody was filming it, and just took a black man's life. And the sad part about it, the injustice that this victim experienced, that when you took it to an all-white jury, or it may be mixed in with white and black, they, even though the prosecutor indict these officers, there is not a jury that will convict them. And all that have to do, that's injustice. And there is no judge that will overturn the convictions of the jury when he finds or she finds a pattern of injustice. There is no justifiable reason that people who just trying to live and trying to mind their business is treated in a manner that is not appropriate. And a lot of that is because I'm not beating up on officers, and we need officers, but there's some bad officers who have bad tempers, and they you are a police officer, and also you're a peace officer. You're to bring peace. So there's a lot of injustice in the land, and there's a lot of disparity in the land, not just on the part of the people who have the power to minister justice, but also some of us that we have perpetuate injustice attitudes, injustice, this actions against each other. My God, I pray to the Lord that one day that the Lord would help us as we move forward to see that we are all one, and that we are our brother's keeper. Now let me say this in my conclusion as we bring this lesson to a conclusion. One of my weaknesses is the story of Esther, because I see that story in light of how so many people are, how people allow other folks to manipulate them with little to no information, where people in authority make decisions over the lives of people, and as a result of that, injustice is ministered against someone. Please, as you move forward to kind of dispel injustice, your responsibility will be is to get all the information you possibly can. Don't allow nobody to manipulate you, because not only are they coming after them, but they're coming after you. And be mindful that you can be used for your own demise and don't even know it. And so Esther had to correct this. She had to do what she had to do and say, if I perish, I am so determined to undo this justice that's happening. If I perish, let me perish. I am going to see the King. That's what she's saying. I got to undo this. You do what you can within your power to undo. And years ago we had voices. We had Frederick Douglass as a voice, and the list can go down. We had Martin Luther King as a voice in the various different phases of life. We've had voices. Now we have an emerging voice of Al Sharpton. Jesse Jackson was a voice, and some of these men who's older now are passing on the baton. And my question is, don't drop. When the baton is passed, who will the baton be passed on to? And if you have the baton, don't drop it. Speak out, stand up, and be heard. That righteousness exalt a nation, and sin is reproach against any people. Righteousness exalt a nation. We will need a righteous people in order to produce a righteous nation. God bless you. This is our lesson for the day. I know I kind of going through it and hit and miss and did a whole lot of things. I tried to use a different format today with just reading all that. You can read this. I just want to expound on it and add to it for our lesson. Continue to pray. We will assemble again for our Sunday school lesson. Continue to trust God and don't allow people to manipulate you, to give you limited information for you to perpetuate injustice in your home, on your job, wherever you are. Be a champion of justice. Be a champion of justice. And if you are at the end of your life, you have fulfilled your purpose, and he will say to you, well done, my good and faithful servant. We're going to close at this time. Perhaps I have always been propelled to invite you to Jesus the Christ. If you are unsaved, if you have not accepted him as Lord and Savior, I invite you to give your life to Jesus. He can do for you what nobody else can do. He's able and he's willing. Trust him and obey him, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus if you trust him and obey. Father, we thank you for this day and for this time together, for the Sunday school teachers across the length and breadth of these United States of America. Bless us, Lord, and keep us. Help us. We thank you for this live feed, unedited, that people can see the raw vulnerability, and that they can see that this is not just an act, but this is how we are. We love you and we praise you. Bless pastors and people everywhere, and the will of the Lord be done. We see you at 10:30 for the worship of friendship